I leaned back in my chair, staring at the message glowing on my phone screen. Please, let's talk. I need to see you. It was from Samantha. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the divorce. I never thought I'd be here again, not after everything. She begged me to meet at a park we used to go to, claiming she needed to tell me something urgent. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived, she looked thinner, worn out, as if life had taken everything from her. Michael, her voice trembled. I want us to try again. Please, I've changed. Her words hit me like ice. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity. The other part was furious. How could she have the nerve to ask after all she'd done? I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered, turning my back on her. No, she grabbed my arm, her desperation thick in her voice. You don't understand. We can fix this. I can fix this. Just give me another chance. I pulled away from her. The memory of what she had done, of him, flashed through my mind. The betrayal, the lies, the night everything shattered. It started so innocently, or so I thought. That Thursday, everything felt routine, like any other evening. I was at home, unwinding after a long day at work, staring at the basketball game playing on TV. Samantha had just turned 31 a few weeks earlier. We celebrated her birthday in a quiet, intimate way, dinner at our favorite restaurant, followed by a long walk through the city, talking about the future, kids, and where we saw ourselves in a few years. I thought everything was fine. Hell, I knew everything was fine. Or maybe I just convinced myself that it was. Marriages go through rough patches, right? We were no exception. The last year or so, things had been strained, but not unfixable. We'd argued more than usual, mainly over small things, forgotten anniversaries, neglected chores, time spent apart. But I always assumed we'd work through it, as we always did. That night, she stood in front of the mirror, getting ready for her girls' night out. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her pull on her favorite black dress, the one that always hugged her body just right. I couldn't help but admire how beautiful she still was after all these years. Her blonde hair cascaded down her shoulders in soft waves, and her makeup was just enough to highlight her sharp cheekbones and bright blue eyes. There was a time I would have said she was out of my league, and maybe she was. You look stunning, I said, smiling. She glanced back at me, her reflection catching my eye in the mirror. Thanks, she muttered, barely acknowledging the compliment. That should have been the first red flag. There was a coldness in her tone that hadn't been there before, a distance in her eyes. But I didn't push. Maybe she was just tired. She had been under a lot of stress at work lately. I brushed it off as nothing, figuring she'd warm up once she had a night with her friends. Don't wait up for me, she added, grabbing her purse and slipping on her heels. It might be late. I nodded, distracted by the game, not realizing the deeper meaning behind her words. Have fun. Love you, I said casually, barely looking up. Yeah, you too, she responded. Her voice seemed distant, almost rehearsed, like saying those words didn't hold any weight anymore. As soon as she walked out the door, that nagging feeling hit me. It wasn't immediate, but it was there, like a whisper in the back of my mind that something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the fact that she had dressed up more than usual for a night out with friends, or that she seemed so detached when she left. But I ignored it, chalking it up to overthinking. Trust was important in a relationship, and I trusted her. I had no reason not to. Hours passed. I tried to focus on the game, but the distraction was persistent. She was usually good about texting me updates during her nights out, telling me when she'd be back or who she was with. But that night, nothing. Not a single message. I glanced at the clock, 11:30 p.m. Still, no word. I told myself she was probably caught up with the girls, having fun, and didn't want to be rude by constantly checking her phone. And then, her phone buzzed. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen. I looked over, confused. She'd left it behind, sitting on the counter next to her car keys. It wasn't like her to forget something as important as her phone, but I figured she'd just been in a rush. Another buzz. My curiosity got the best of me. Without thinking, I reached over, picked it up, and the screen lit up with a message. Jake asterisk. Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. Same place as last time. Asterisk. I stared at the message, blinking. Jake. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart began to pound in my chest, and a knot formed in my stomach. Who the hell was Jake? I didn't recognize the name. We didn't know any Jake, at least not anyone close enough to be calling her, babe. Panic surged through me, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Jake was a friend from work, and, babe, was just a term he used casually. But I knew I was lying to myself. I unlocked her phone, something I swore I'd never do, but the suspicion was gnawing at me. I had to know. What I found shattered me. The messages between her and Jake went back months. He wasn't some casual acquaintance. He was a lover, a man I had no idea existed until this very moment. The texts were filled with plans, secrets, and confessions of feelings that she had never shared with me. There were pictures, too. Images of them together, smiling, laughing, kissing. Her face looked happier in those photos than I'd seen in years. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I scrolled through the conversations. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. Each new message was like a dagger, twisting deeper into my chest. The betrayal was overwhelming. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to me, told me she was out with the girls when she was really with him? I paced around the house, my mind racing. Should I confront her? Should I wait? My entire world was crumbling around me, and I didn't know what to do. But one thing was clear, I couldn't sit at home, stewing in this newfound hell. I needed to see it for myself. I grabbed my keys and left the house, heart pounding in my chest as I drove to the address Jake had mentioned in one of the texts. It was a bar on the other side of town, one I wasn't familiar with. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and every worst-case scenario flashed in my mind. What if I found them together? What if she was with him right now? The drive felt like it took forever, but eventually, I arrived. I parked across the street, my eyes scanning the parking lot, waiting. A few minutes passed, then I saw them. Samantha, laughing, walking arm in arm with Jake. He was tall, about 35, with dark hair and a confident stride. She looked up at him with a gaze that once belonged to me. They stopped in front of his car. She smiled, leaned in, and kissed him deeply, passionately. The kind of kiss she hadn't given me in months. My blood ran cold. I sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. That was it. There was no coming back from this. I couldn't confront her right then. Not like this. Instead, I watched them drive away, and I drove home in silence, the weight of what I'd just seen suffocating me. Samantha came home, hours later, smiling, acting as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek and went straight to bed. But I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The truth was too heavy to ignore. The next morning was colder than usual, or at least that's how it felt. Samantha moved around the kitchen like she always did, making coffee, humming softly, and scrolling through her phone as if the world hadn't shattered. The surrealness of it all hit me like a freight train. She had kissed me goodnight after coming home from him. She had looked me in the eyes and acted like everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. I had seen everything. I sat at the kitchen table, staring into my cup of coffee, unable to bring myself to speak. My mind was racing with 100 different thoughts, each one worse than the last. Should I confront her now? Wait, should I scream at her? Ask her why? There was no manual for dealing with this kind of betrayal. No guide to tell you what the hell you're supposed to do when you find out your wife has been cheating on you for months. She caught my gaze as she poured herself a cup of coffee. You okay, babe? You seem quiet today. The nerve, the absolute gall of her to ask me that, knowing what she'd done, what I now knew. I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening around the mug. For a split second, I considered telling her right there. I could almost see myself flipping the table, shouting, and demanding answers. But I didn't. Something stopped me. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was that small part of me that didn't want to believe it was real. I didn't want to hear her lie to my face when I already knew the truth. Instead, I said, yeah, just tired. Tired? You sure that's it? You look like something's bothering you, she pressed, taking a sip of her coffee, her eyes studying me. I forced a smile, the kind that hurt to put on. Yeah, I'm sure. She smiled back, satisfied with the answer, and went about her morning routine as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The hours passed like molasses. The thought of confronting her gnawed at me, but every time I pictured her face when I'd bring it up, my stomach twisted in knots. How do you start that conversation? Do you just blurt it out? Hey, by the way, I know you've been sleeping with Jake for months. How's that going for you? I couldn't even imagine her response. Would she deny it? Would she cry? Would she even care? That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I'd spent the entire day trying to keep up the act, but every time I looked at her, I saw her with him. Every smile, every laugh she gave me felt fake, forced. So, I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet and sat in the living room, pouring myself glass after glass, trying to drown out the pain. I hoped the alcohol would make it hurt less. It didn't. Samantha came into the room and sat next to me on the couch, glancing at the bottle. "You okay?" she asked again, concern lacing her voice. The anger bubbled up in my chest. It was too much to contain anymore. I couldn't pretend. I couldn't sit there and act like everything was fine when it wasn't. I slammed the glass down on the table and turned to face her. "How long?" I asked, my voice low and controlled, though I felt anything but calm. She blinked, confused. "How long what?" I stared at her, feeling the fury rise in me. "How long have you been fucking Jake?" The color drained from her face. She sat frozen, mouth slightly open, as if the words hadn't registered yet. But they had. I could see it in her eyes, the way they flickered with fear, guilt, and something else. Maybe shame, or maybe she was just sorry she got caught. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her voice cracked, betraying her. "Don't lie to me," I shouted, standing up, my fists clenched. "I know everything, Samantha. The texts, the pictures. I followed you last night. I saw you with him." Her hands flew to her mouth, and she let out a small, panicked gasp. "Michael, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I laughed bitterly. "Explain how you've been lying to me for months. How you've been sneaking around behind my back, sleeping with another man. What the hell is there to explain?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not after what she had done. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It just happened." "Bullshit." The words slipped out before I could stop it. "You don't accidentally cheat on your husband, Samantha. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Every time you went to see him, every lie you told, that was a choice." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the pain she caused me was too deep, too raw. She had taken everything, my trust, my love, my belief in us, and shattered it. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I never wanted to hurt you." I sat back down, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on me. I was exhausted, emotionally drained. "Then why did you do it?" She sniffled, wiping her tears away. "I don't know, I was lonely. We were drifting apart, and Jake, he made me feel special again. Like I mattered, like I was wanted." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you cheat on me because I wasn't giving you enough attention? That's your excuse." "It's not an excuse," she sobbed. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But things haven't been the same between us for a long time, Michael. You know that." She was right about that, at least. Things hadn't been the same. But that didn't justify what she did. Nothing could justify that. So instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix what was wrong, you just decided to throw it all away?" I asked, my voice hollow. She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, a huge mistake, but I still love you, Michael. I do. Please, please don't leave me." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Love, she was asking me not to leave, after all of this. How could she even say that? "I don't know if I can do this anymore," I muttered, staring at the floor. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." "I'll do anything," she pleaded, grabbing my hands. "I'll cut off all contact with Jake. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, just give me a chance to fix this." Her desperation was palpable, but it was too late. The damage was done. I looked into her eyes and saw the woman I once loved, but she wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the same person anymore. "I need time," I said quietly. "I need space to think." She nodded, still crying, and for the rest of the night, we didn't say another word to each other. The silence was suffocating, but I needed it. I needed to figure out what to do next. The next few days were a blur. Samantha tried to act like everything was normal, but there was a tension between us that couldn't be ignored. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was short, clipped sentences. I avoided being home as much as possible, staying late at work or going for long drives just to clear my head. I needed to escape the suffocating reality that had become my life. I told a few close friends about what had happened. They were shocked, of course. They couldn't believe that Samantha, the woman they thought was the perfect wife, had cheated. But they offered their support, telling me to take my time and not rush into any decisions. But deep down, I already knew what I had to do. The marriage was over. There was no fixing this. No matter how many tears Samantha shed or how many promises she made, the trust was gone, and without trust, there was nothing left. One night, a week after the confrontation, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, staring at the floor. She looked up at me as I walked in, her eyes red from crying. "Are you leaving me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stood there, silent for a moment, the weight of her question hanging in the air. And then, finally, I nodded. "Yeah, I am." Her face crumpled, and she let out a heartbreaking sob. But I didn't waver. I couldn't. "I'm sorry," I said, though the words felt hollow. "But I can't do this anymore." The divorce was final a month later. The process was grueling, filled with legal battles and emotional turmoil, but it was done. The ink was barely dry on the papers before Samantha was already trying to contact me again, pleading for another chance. But I was resolute. I had moved out of the house, found a small apartment, and was starting to rebuild my life. It was a slow, painful process, but it was necessary. The first few weeks in my new place were the hardest. I spent most of my time sorting through my belongings, trying to piece together the remnants of the life Samantha and I had once shared. The empty apartment was a constant reminder of the void left by her absence, but it was also a space for me to heal and start fresh. I reconnected with old friends and family members I hadn't seen in years. My sister, Lisa, who lived a few hours away, was a constant support. She came over often, helping me unpack and offering a shoulder to cry on when the weight of the separation felt too heavy. "Hey, you okay?" Lisa asked one afternoon as we sat in my new, sparsely furnished living room. She had brought over a few boxes of my old books and knickknacks, the only real remnants of my past life with Samantha. I looked around at the bare walls, the mismatched furniture, and shook my head. "I don't know, Lee. It's hard. Everything feels so empty. It's going to take time," she said softly, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "But you're doing the right thing. You need to focus on yourself now. You've been through so much." Her words were a balm to my wounded soul, though they couldn't fully heal the damage. I appreciated her support, but I knew that the journey to moving on would be long and arduous. I also began spending more time with my close friends, trying to regain a semblance of normalcy. We met up at bars, went hiking, and played board games. Each outing was a distraction from the constant ache in my heart. But even in these moments of camaraderie, the shadow of my past lingered. During one such gathering, I ran into Tom, a former colleague from my old job. We hadn't spoken much since I left, but he had heard about the divorce and reached out. "Hey, Michael," Tom said, clapping me on the back. "I heard about what happened. Man, I'm really sorry." "Thanks," I replied, trying to muster a smile. "It's been rough, but I'm getting through it." We ended up talking for hours, reminiscing about old times and catching up on each other's lives. Tom's presence was a welcome distraction, and his stories about work and life helped me forget, if only for a little while, the pain I was feeling. As the weeks turned into months, I started to find my footing again. I began focusing on my career, taking up new projects and exploring opportunities I had ignored during my marriage. The work kept me occupied and gave me a renewed sense of purpose. I also started attending a support group for people who had gone through similar experiences. Hearing others share their stories of betrayal and heartache was both comforting and unsettling. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone, but it also forced me to confront the depth of my own pain. One evening, while having dinner with a few members of the support group, I learned about Lisa's struggles with her own marriage. She and her husband had been having issues for years, but they had stayed together for the sake of their children. It was a sobering reminder that everyone had their battles, and it helped me gain a sense of perspective. "Michael," Lisa said one night after a particularly emotional group session, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You're stronger than you think." Her words, though simple, meant a lot. They were a testament to the fact that even amidst the wreckage, there was hope for recovery. Then came the holidays. They were a difficult time, filled with memories of past celebrations with Samantha. I found myself feeling particularly melancholic. The family gatherings, once filled with joy, were now a stark reminder of what I had lost. I spent Christmas Eve alone in my apartment, reflecting on the past year and the changes it had brought. The first holiday without Samantha was a test of endurance. My family tried to make it easier by inviting me to their celebrations, but it only highlighted the absence of my former life. I smiled through it, grateful for their support, but the joy felt distant, like a flickering light in a storm. Despite the challenges, I managed to find some solace in my new routine. I volunteered at a local charity, helping to distribute meals to those in need. The experience was humbling and provided a sense of purpose that helped to fill the void left by the divorce. Through all of this, Samantha continued to reach out. She sent messages and letters, asking for forgiveness and trying to explain herself. I ignored most of them. The occasional message that slipped through felt like a ghost from my past, haunting me with what once was. But I refused to engage. I had made my decision, and I was determined to stick to it. As the months passed, I began to feel a sense of normalcy creeping back into my life. The pain of the divorce was still there, but it was no longer the overwhelming force it once was. I had started to heal, to rediscover who I was outside of my relationship with Samantha. One day, as I was walking through a park near my apartment, I bumped into an old friend from college. She was someone I had lost touch with over the years, but seeing her was a reminder that life goes on. We exchanged pleasantries and agreed to meet up for coffee sometime. It was a small but significant step toward rebuilding my social life and moving forward. A year after the divorce, I was slowly finding my new rhythm. My apartment felt more like home, and I had settled into a routine that, while not perfect, was manageable. Work was keeping me busy, and my social life was gradually improving. Then came the news that Samantha's new boyfriend, Jake, had been involved in a severe car accident. It was a jarring reminder of my past, and it hit me harder than I expected. Jake had been Samantha's affair partner, and their relationship had become serious after our split. They had moved in together, and from what I had heard through mutual acquaintances, they were planning a future. But life had a cruel way of throwing curveballs, and Jake's accident was one of them. The news came from Lisa, who called me one evening with the details. She had heard it from a mutual friend who was still in touch with Samantha. Jake had been driving home late at night when he lost control of his car, crashing into a tree. The impact was severe, and he was left paralyzed from the waist down. "Michael, I didn't know if you had heard," Lisa said, her voice heavy with concern. "But Jake is in really bad shape. I thought you should know." I was taken aback. The details felt surreal, like something out of a bad dream. I had mixed emotions. A part of me felt a strange sense of relief, while another part felt a pang of sympathy. Despite everything that had happened, Jake was still a person who had been close to Samantha. His suffering was a grim reminder of how complicated life had become. I found myself thinking about Samantha. How was she handling this? The thought of her dealing with Jake's injury and the fallout from it filled me with a complicated mix of curiosity and dread. I couldn't help but wonder if this tragedy had changed her in any way. A few weeks later, I ran into one of Samantha's old friends at a cafe. Her name was Claire, and she was someone I had known from our social circle. Claire was visibly shaken, and after a brief exchange of pleasantries, she opened up about Jake's accident. "It's been awful," Claire said, her eyes filled with worry. "Samantha's been really struggling. She's taking care of Jake, but the burden is immense. She's not handling it well." I listened, trying to gauge the gravity of Samantha's situation. Claire mentioned that Samantha was overwhelmed, juggling the responsibilities of caring for Jake while managing her own emotional turmoil. The accident had taken a toll on her physically and mentally. The sympathy I had initially felt for Jake now extended to Samantha, though I still felt a distance between us. It was clear that Samantha was facing a crisis, but I was conflicted. Part of me wanted to reach out and offer support, but another part of me feared getting entangled in her problems again. The bitterness of our past was still fresh, and I wasn't ready to re-enter that chapter of my life. A few months later, I heard that Samantha and Jake had moved to a more accessible apartment to accommodate his needs. From what I gathered, the financial strain was significant, and Samantha was struggling to make ends meet. The once promised future she had envisioned with Jake had turned into a daily battle against adversity. One day, I saw a social media post from Claire sharing an update about Jake's condition. It was a heartfelt message expressing hope and support for Samantha and Jake. It was a reminder of how much had changed and how much people's lives had been upended by the accident. Several months after Jake's accident, Samantha reached out to me. The contact came as a shock, not just because of the timing but because of the content of her message. She wanted to get back together. Her first message was a simple text: "Michael, can we talk?" I need to explain. I was stunned. I hadn't heard from her in months, and now she was reaching out with a plea to reconcile. I hesitated before replying. Part of me was tempted to ignore her, to continue moving forward without looking back. But curiosity and a lingering sense of unresolved feelings drove me to agree to meet her. We arranged to meet at a cafe we had frequented during our marriage. It was a place filled with memories, both good and bad. When Samantha arrived, she looked different. The vibrant woman I once knew was now gaunt and worn, with visible signs of stress and fatigue. "Michael," she said as we sat down, her voice trembling. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. "What's this about, Samantha?" She took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "Jake's condition has been really hard on me. I've been struggling to cope with everything, and I realized how much I miss you. How much I need you. I made a terrible mistake, and I want to make things right. I want us to be together again." The words were like a punch to the gut. I had anticipated this moment, but hearing it out loud was something else entirely. I had moved on, rebuilt my life, and was finally finding some semblance of happiness. The idea of going back to the pain of the past was unthinkable. "I don't know what to say," I replied, struggling to maintain my composure. "You hurt me deeply, Samantha. I'm not sure I can just forget about all of that." "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I messed up. But I've been through so much since then. I've learned a lot about myself and about what really matters. Please, Michael, give me another chance. Let me prove that I've changed." Her plea was heartfelt, and I could see the genuine pain in her eyes. But no matter how much she might have changed, the past couldn't be undone. The trust that had been shattered was not easily repaired. "I appreciate that you're trying to make amends," I said softly, "but I've moved on. I've started a new chapter in my life. I'm not the same person I was when we were together. And neither are you, for that matter. We've both changed, and I don't think going back is the right thing for either of us." Samantha's face fell, and she began to cry. Her sobs were heart-wrenching, filled with a mix of regret and despair. "Please, Michael," she begged. "I need you. Jake's accident has made me realize how much I took you for granted. I don't want to be alone anymore. I want us to be together again." The emotional weight of her words was almost too much to bear. I felt a pang of sympathy, but I also felt a deep sense of resolve. I had worked hard to get to where I was, and I couldn't let the past pull me back. "I'm sorry," I said firmly. "But I can't do this. I can't go back to a relationship that caused so much pain. It's not fair to either of us." Her reaction was immediate and intense. Her face turned red with anger, and she slammed her fists on the table. "You don't understand," she shouted. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything and then realize that you still want what you had." The outburst was startling, and the cafe patrons glanced over with curiosity. Samantha's anger was raw and unfiltered, a stark contrast to the vulnerability she had shown moments before. "I do understand," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. "I've been through a lot too. And I've come to terms with it. I can't help you with your pain, and I can't be a part of your life again." Samantha stood up, her eyes blazing with fury and desperation. "You think you're better than me? You think you can just walk away without a second thought?" Her words stung, but I remained composed. "No, it's not about being better. It's about what's best for both of us. And this isn't it." As I watched her leave, her shoulders slumped and her steps heavy, I felt a complex mix of emotions. The anger she had displayed was unsettling, and I wondered how much of her turmoil was genuine and how much was the result of her own spiraling despair. In the days that followed, I received more messages from Samantha. They were increasingly erratic and desperate, ranging from heartfelt apologies to angry outbursts. I ignored them, knowing that engaging further would only complicate things. Samantha's breakdown was a dramatic end to a chapter of my life that I had fought hard to close. It was a stark reminder of the depth of human emotions and the complexity of relationships. The pain and turmoil that had once defined our lives had now become part of the past, and I was determined to leave it there. Samantha's unraveling after my rejection was immediate and intense. Her messages to me went from emotional pleas to outright hostility in a matter of days. It was as if the delicate balance she had been struggling to maintain in her life had finally collapsed, and she had no idea how to cope. The woman who had once prided herself on being in control of every aspect of her life had lost it all. Her marriage, her relationship with Jake as a stable partner, and now, the hope of reconciliation with me. Her texts became increasingly erratic. At first, it was, "Please, Michael, I'll do anything," or, "I've learned my lesson. I can be the woman you need." Then came the anger. "You're just as heartless as I always thought, and, you were never man enough to understand me anyway." Each message was a jarring switch between love and hatred, a pendulum of emotions that only highlighted how deeply she was spiraling. I ignored every single message. The more I distanced myself from her chaos, the clearer it became that I had made the right decision. Even though I once thought about responding, out of curiosity, out of guilt, I knew better. I had a life to live, and this wasn't part of it anymore. I had moved forward. Samantha was still chasing ghosts. Lisa, who had remained in touch with mutual friends, told me Samantha's mental state worsened after our confrontation. She started drinking heavily, something she had never done before. Friends noticed her erratic behavior. Claire told me she would show up at their gatherings, talking about me as if I was still in her life, as if I were just away on a business trip and would return soon. It disturbed her friends, who tried to intervene, but Samantha had shut herself off from anyone who didn't align with her fantasy. Her obsession with me didn't stop at friends. One afternoon, I found a letter she had left in the mailbox of my apartment. It was handwritten and several pages long, filled with memories of our time together, how we met, our wedding, the early years of our marriage. She romanticized everything, as if those were the only things that defined our relationship. The affair, the betrayal, the hurt, all glossed over, as if they never existed. "I've been thinking a lot about us," the letter read. "We had something beautiful once, and I believe we can have that again. I'm not with Jake because I love him, I'm with him because I'm scared. Scared of being alone, scared of not knowing how to move forward without you. I need you to give me another chance, Michael." The desperation was palpable, but there was also something eerie about how she was rewriting history, making it fit the narrative she wanted to believe. It was as if the real world was too much for her to bear, so she created her own, one where we were always meant to be together, no matter how much damage had been done. It all came to a head one night when Lisa called me, her voice frantic. "Michael, you need to know what's happening with Samantha," she said. "She's losing it. She tried to break into your old house last night. The neighbors called the cops." I was speechless. This wasn't the Samantha I had known. Even during the divorce, even at her lowest points, she had always been composed. This was something else, something darker. I knew then that my decision to stay away had been the only thing keeping me safe from getting pulled back into her web of chaos. For weeks, Samantha disappeared from the social scene. No one knew where she was or what she was doing. It was like she had vanished from existence. But then, slowly, I started hearing whispers that she had gone back to Jake. At first, it seemed impossible. How could she return to the man she had once used as an escape from our marriage, the man who was now paralyzed and dependent on her for everything? But life has a strange way of forcing people into situations they never thought they'd be in. Jake needed care, and Samantha needed someone to need her. It was a toxic, codependent relationship, but it was what they both had. Jake, from what I gathered, wasn't the same person he had been before the accident. He was more withdrawn, angrier. He resented his condition, and, in turn, began to resent Samantha. But despite the tension between them, they remained together. It was as if they were bound by shared misfortune. According to Claire, who had visited them a few times, Samantha had thrown herself into the role of caregiver. She quit her job to take care of Jake full-time, and in some ways, it seemed like this new life had given her a strange sense of purpose. The chaos in her mind had quieted down, and the obsessive texts to me had stopped. It wasn't that she had moved on, far from it, but she had found a way to cope by focusing all her energy on Jake's recovery, even though it was clear he would never fully heal. "Samantha's not the same person anymore," Claire told me over coffee one afternoon. "She's hollow. Everything that made her Samantha, it's gone. She's just existing now, taking care of Jake. It's like she's punishing herself." Hearing that, I didn't feel satisfaction or triumph. I just felt pity. The woman who had once tormented me with her betrayal and her pleas for forgiveness was now trapped in a life she didn't want, caring for a man who could never be the partner she once imagined. She was stuck, living out the consequences of her choices. Meanwhile, I was in the process of closing the final chapter of this part of my life. I had been offered a job overseas, a chance to start completely fresh in a place where no one knew me or my past. The opportunity felt like the universe giving me permission to finally let go, to truly move forward without looking back. Before I left, I met up with Lisa and a few of our old friends for a farewell dinner. The mood was light, filled with laughter and reminiscing, but I couldn't help but think about how different my life had become since the divorce. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, and now I was about to embark on a new adventure, one that didn't involve Samantha or the pain she had caused. As the evening wound down, Lisa pulled me aside. "You're doing the right thing by leaving," she said quietly. "Samantha's situation, it's a mess, and I'm glad you're not caught up in it anymore." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the closure I had been searching for, the final acknowledgement that I had made the right choices for my life. Samantha's story was hers to live out, and mine was ready for a new chapter. The day I boarded the plane, I thought about all the people I had left behind, my friends, my family, and even Samantha. I wondered if she ever thought about me, about what could have been. But as the plane took off, I realized it didn't matter. I had my life ahead of me, and she had hers. Back in the city, Samantha continued her life with Jake. They were together, but it wasn't love that bound them. It was something far more complex: guilt, regret, necessity. Her breakdown had led her back to him, and now, they both had to live with the consequences. As for me, I settled into my new life abroad, far from the chaos that had once defined my existence. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the past, free from Samantha, free to finally live for myself.